All right, good morning. So we are continuing in our series, How to Be Generous, 7 Questions You Must Answer. And our sub-question for the day is, what's the goal? Like, what's the point? What's the goal of all of this talk about generosity? Where are we heading? And in order to get at that question today, I'm going to look specifically at the story of Zacchaeus, Luke 19. If you've been around the church for a while, you've probably heard this story a lot. And if you grew up like going to Sunday school, everybody remembers, Zacchaeus was a wee little man was he, and whatever. And it's kind of unfortunate that that's like the one detail people remember, because this is one of my favorite of all the stories in the Bible. It's very rich, and it's actually a little dark. But as we go through the story, hopefully you'll see that unfold. So before we actually jump into that story, we have a little bit of background work we should probably do. Jesus, at this point in the book of Luke, is heading toward Jerusalem. And Luke is a masterful storyteller. And he has set Jesus on this trajectory, heading toward Jerusalem, kind of building tension and expectation amongst us, the readers. And Jesus has been saying, like, look, when we get there, it is not going to go well for me. And the disciples at the same time are like, no, it's going to be fine. We're establishing the kingdom. Like, they just don't totally get it. And so there's this tension and expectation that when Jesus gets into Jerusalem, he is going to be confronting the dark powers that are in control, and he is going to lose his life in the process. And through that, God is going to win an incredible victory. But not yet. But we do have that tension and expectation hanging in the air. So in Luke 18:35, Jesus approaches the city of Jericho, and he encounters a blind man, and he's healed and all that. You can read about that on your own. But there's some cultural stuff here that is easy to miss. As Jesus is approaching Jericho, there would be some expectations, and most of them are met. You have a famous traveling teacher or rabbi. People have heard that he's performed miracles. Some of them may have seen him. He has a reputation. So it would be expected that the people in the town would leave, go out to meet him as he approaches, walk with him in kind of a parade of some sort into the city, and then this guy would then choose who he would eat with. Like, who would host him? And that would be a great honor for the person who he chose. And it would be an honor for the town, and then the town honors him by welcoming him in. This was also the case for like foreign dignitaries, kings, emperors, and so on. There are a few stories where the response of the town was not good enough, and the town was like destroyed by some angry Roman politician or something like that. So this is happening in the background. Jesus is welcomed into the city. But as we see in chapter 19, verse 1, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. So this is almost like a faux pas, like it would be awkward. It might be a little upsetting or unsettling. It might be taken personally, but Jesus doesn't follow cultural protocol. It would, at the least, it would be weird, especially for a culture that really values hospitality and feeding people. So Jesus doesn't want to linger, or at least not yet. And we're also introduced to the major player in this story other than Jesus. His name is Zacchaeus. And we're told that he is a chief tax collector and was wealthy. So when the Greeks took over this area, which would have been like 250, 300 years before Jesus, give or take, they established like taxation schemes for their conquered people. And when we think of taxes, I'm guessing you don't love to pay them, but we pay them in part because they'll, throw us in jail if we don't, but also because we get something in return. We get infrastructure, we get education, social services, and that sort of thing. In the ancient world, taxation was about domination. The Greeks and then the Romans and and whoever else come in, they say, all right, you are now under our boot. We will require X percentage of whatever crops you grow. Those numbers tended to be pretty high. And it was a way of them kind of feeding their own people and also demonstrating who's really in charge here. And the Greeks especially, it began under them, they realized that the most effective way to do this is to use tax farmers who were indigenous. In other words, people who were willing to sell out their own people, get rich in the process, and make sure that a whole taxation thing was as efficient as possible. That's what Zacchaeus did. He was a collaborator with the Romans, selling his fellow Jews out. He is not a good guy. But we're told he's wealthy, which means he's really good at what he does. Here's where it gets even worse. Imagine it's time to assess for taxes. Zacchaeus goes down the road to somebody he's known most of his life, says, all right, this year the Romans want 30%. So that's what I'm going to need. I know how much your land produces. And maybe this guy says in response, it was 27% last year. What are you talking about? Zacchaeus might say, the Romans want 30 this year. But I can't. I just enforce it. What am I going to do? Now, there's no way to verify that. And there's nobody to complain to because everyone else that he could complain to is making a profit. Where do you think that extra 3% is going? Right into his pocket and the pocket of people above him. Zacchaeus is not a good guy. And he probably lived a very isolated life. He couldn't really be super social because everybody hated him. But here's the kicker. He deserved it. He's kind of like a combination of like Bernie Madoff, if you remember him, the Ponzi schemer from several years ago, if Bernie Madoff had federal authority. Like, these are not great people. So, we are introduced to Zacchaeus. Now, something about him wants to see Jesus. So we're told he wanted to see Jesus, or who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. Now, for starters, it's really nice to have my own people represented in the Bible, us who are not super tall. But he's something compels him to see who this rabbi was. Maybe he heard about him or something like that. So he runs ahead, climbs a sycamore fig tree to see him since Jesus was coming that way. I'll show you something here. This is a sycamore tree. You can see that they're, at least according to Wikipedia, I don't know trees very well. But those are some good climbing branches, and the leaves are pretty thick and full, so you could be in there and it would be hard to see you. That's kind of an important point. So think about what's going on here. He can't see over the crowd. He can't really be involved in the crowd. A scholar by the name of Ken Bailey, from whom I'm drawing a chunk of this material, has a lot of cool things to say about it. He was a New Testament scholar. He has since passed, with the distinction that he lived a good chunk of his life in the Middle East. So he understands the culture better than we do. And he pointed out that first off, Zacchaeus couldn't go anywhere near this crowd. I mean, imagine all this chaos, people kind of crowding around. They're all looking to see Jesus as he passes through Jericho. And then imagine Zacchaeus is stuck like in the middle of that crowd. Would be a shame if somebody happened to have a knife and then the crowd disperses. Oh, there's Zacchaeus bleeding out. Bummer. I hated that guy, so whatever. Like, Zacchaeus could be in very real danger, and things like that did happen. So instead, even though he's this wealthy, powerful person, the crowd would not pay him the honor that he would prefer. And so he runs and climbs this tree. And as Ken Bailey points out, a dignified, powerful, wealthy person does not run, and he does not climb anything. That is just not what you do. Imagine extremely powerful heads of state or something like that, or running around like a crazy person or climbing a tree. It would be really, really weird to us. And it would probably be like offensive or embarrassing to them. But Zacchaeus, this is his only way. And we know that he actually had to run a fair bit of distance. Early Jewish writing says that because sycamore trees were so big and full and messy, they had to be a certain distance away from the outskirts of a town. So Zacchaeus booked it. He is becoming incredibly undignified, and he is not acting like the powerful person that he is. So when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today." Which raises a question. How does Jesus know his name? I mean, he's Jesus. He's not a magician or something like that. Well, this is where Ken Bailey points out, and I think he's spot on, that imagine the scenario. Everybody hates Zacchaeus, and Zacchaeus has earned this reputation. They can tell he ran ahead, and they have spotted him up in a tree trying to see Jesus. As this crowd is already kind of disgruntled because Jesus has not chosen to honor them and their town by passing through, now they're on the outskirts of the town, they see this guy that they can't stand because he's ripped everybody off and sold his own people out to the Romans. He is up there in a tree, which means he is extremely vulnerable. There aren't any Roman soldiers around. His buddies aren't there. Not only is he probably being mocked, but this could become a very dangerous situation very quickly. Zacchaeus is in danger. At this point, Jesus reaches out to him. "Zacchaeus, come down. I must stay at your house today." So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly, probably glad he's not going to be either killed or beaten to within an inch of his life. And all the people saw this and began to mutter, "He has gone to be the guest of a sinner." Wait, so out of everybody Jesus could have honored in Jericho, he chooses Bernie Madoff with federal power. And so now the crowd is mad at Jesus. Think about what happened. Everyone's there. They're looking up at Zacchaeus. Can't stand that guy, and there's good reason for it. They're like, "Oh, he's up in a tree. He is vulnerable. This could get ugly fast." Jesus now says, "I am going to honor you, Zacchaeus. You will be the one to host me." And the crowd is now upset at Jesus. You have a very guilty person, Zacchaeus. Jesus takes his shame and the wrath of the crowd onto himself so that Zacchaeus can go free. Jesus takes the guilt and shame of Zacchaeus onto himself so that Zacchaeus can be saved. That's the gospel. We're here because Jesus took on our sin, our guilt, our tendency to destroy ourselves and those around us, onto himself, gave his life for us so that we can live. Jesus gave his reputation and took on the shame of Zacchaeus so that he would go free. Luke is a masterful storyteller. He has told the story of the gospel by pointing out these details. So now, Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times this amount." Now, I don't think the math adds up there, and I think the best explanation for this is that exaggeration in that culture communicates sincerity. Like in our culture, it's the opposite. If I'm exaggerating something, you're automatically going to question my sincerity. Do I mean it? Am I telling the truth? But in that culture, that above and beyond statement shows where your heart is. And Jesus, curiously enough, does not celebrate that the poor and people who desperately need it are going to get what they need. Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham, for the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." Now you would expect Jesus to say something like, people who are poor and starving and living hand to mouth, they are going to eat well because of Zacchaeus. My area of research is the first century, or the economy at the time of Jesus. Trust me, people were extremely poor and it was getting worse. You would expect Jesus to celebrate that, but he doesn't. He celebrates that Zacchaeus, who had been a collaborator with the evil Roman Empire, who cheated and sold out his own people, is now back in the family of God. Which means now we can finally ask our question, what's the goal as we talk about generosity or look at the generosity of Zacchaeus? The goal is not your money. The goal is your heart. The point of generosity is not that we can just get you to write a big fat check. Our Building for the Future campaign, as we've kind of explained everything that we're doing, hopefully you start to see these repairs and these things, we really need them. This isn't about getting fancy and having a really cool state-of-the-art facility. This is just about taking care of the house of God. But we are not trying to just get you to write a really big fat check. Instead, kind of echoing the way God views generosity, he is after the transformation of your heart. But that gets tricky and complicated when you start talking about money. Think about the things that you have or that are in your life that God may ask you to give up or give to him. Now, first off, think of the things that he would not ask for from you. He's almost certainly not going to ask for your spouse. That would just be strange. It doesn't make sense. God is not going to ask for your children, though sometimes that may be tempting. And there was only one time that he did that, and that was Abraham, and he had a whole other thing going on. If God may ask for your time, sure, yeah, if spending some time here or serving God or the church in some way, great. If God needs your skills or your talents, great. We'll be happy to do that. But if we say that God needs your money, then it gets awkward really fast. Because there's just something about the way the human heart gets wrapped around and intertwined with the wealth that we have, that it becomes a very big, awkward ask. Because it is easy to make it about just the money. But if we learn anything from Jesus and Zacchaeus, the point isn't the money. The point is that a heart has been restored. I am certain that Zacchaeus is very keenly aware of what Jesus did for him, saving him from a brutal beating or worse by honoring somebody that everybody hated and for good reason, that it restored his heart. And we are part of this story of restoration and generosity too. That God, the infinite creator, needs nothing from us, but he gave us everything. His Son went to his grave so that we can live, that we can walk away free and forgiven, infinitely and unconditionally loved. We are part of a story of generosity. And the goal of this generosity is not a check. The goal is for your own heart to come alive, to buy into the fact that we are looking to build toward ministry that will extend for generations in the future. To jump in and get involved in the ministry that is taking place now. Our goal for generosity is for a heart that is in love with Jesus and is grateful for how he lavishly gave himself for us. Let's pray.